You're listening to Business Stories with Ryan Arcaracci, where I speak to business professionals from all walks of life. Thanks for listening, and let's get to it. Hey, everybody. We're here for another episode with the Ryan Arcaracci podcast, Business Stories. You know, it's hot out. It's summertime. It's middle of July already. We're over halfway through the year. If you're in a hotter climate, you're probably staying at home a lot. And it's a good time to think about where you're at with your business, where you're with your team, with your leadership skills. So my guest today is Mr. Brian Brogen. He is a leadership expert. We're going to talk about how to develop your leadership, your internal leadership, build your team, collaborate more, and ultimately hit your goals. Since we're already halfway through, believe it or not, 2024, you might already be thinking about what's things are going to look like into next year. As you know, by the time we hit the holidays, things really start to dial down. So, Brian, I'm excited to have you here. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from you about leadership. So thank you for being here.
Ryan, it is great to be on your show. And I've been getting your cup of coffee for years.
Yes. Thank you. Please keep buying it. I need to put gas in my car.
Sometimes people think that my name is when I say Brian, they hear Ryan. So they write that on that cup. So yeah, it's funny that Ryan and Brian sound similar, don't they?
Yeah. And I get the Brian all the time. Oh, you're Brian. Nope. It's Ryan with an R, but it's okay. Yeah. So let's talk about your background and how you came into this role of really helping teams build their leadership and just achieve more. Tell us about your background, Brian.
Well, Ryan, I tell a lot of people I stumbled into an amazing career. I barely graduated high school. In fact, I had to work some extracurricular activities like community service hours to finish high school because I had failed some classes and needed to make up a half a credit. So that's how, and I just barely made it out. And in fact, I didn't like school. I didn't enjoy school. And many times they threatened me with digging ditches, and lo and behold, my first real job was a construction job. I was looking for a job and I stumbled upon a 28-year career in construction. I started off as a laborer and I worked my way up through, and eventually I retired as a vice president of field operations. So it's a crazy journey and enjoyed every minute of it, but learned a lot of lessons along the way.
Yeah. One of the things you bring up is the importance of communication. And I think communication is something that we all need to work on, whether it's in our family life, in our marriages, with our relationships, with our work relationships, with our clients. Tell us about, how do you approach communication to be successful, to build teams, to build leadership? What is your approach to that overall?
Well, Ryan, if to really be honest to start with, I struggle with it.
Yeah.
Communication was not one of my greatest strengths as I ran business, but I learned the hard way. And in fact, you mentioned several, you said our family, our friends, our community, our work, but everybody, all these, what all these people have in common? They're all human beings. Right. And communication is a mistake across the board for many people. In fact, it's been for decades, the number one concern in business is communication. So I thought, if that's a big problem for me and it's a big problem for others, let's try to work on this. Let's have some workshops around being a better communicator. Hey, being a better listener, being an effective listener. And what does that take? That takes being an active listener. When I'm coaching folks today, I tell them to become inquisitive, start asking questions, be in discovery mode. Too often we are biased by our own experiences, by our own situations. And then even we are selfish in what we want from a conversation. But if we can learn to take a step back and make the conversation about the other person and listen to understand, you've heard this many times, not to respond, we're going to be a better communicator, and we're going to get more out of relationships when we learn to listen better and communicate effectively.
Yeah. And I would say it's listening with empathy too. And I think very much in the business world, we automatically think like, oh, we already know the answer to what they're saying, or we already know the best solution. Do we have to dial that down, Brian? Like, what do you recommend people do to really refine their listening skills and just try to be more patient? Because I think in these days, especially with technology, we're so used to this fast response. Oh, I'm just going to text back right away. I'm going to email back right away. And we don't think about, wait a second, let me dial it back and think about how I should respond to this situation.
Love that question. And what I talk to people about is the power of the pause. when you think about taking a pause to make a informed response as opposed to a hasty response, and when you take time to better understand and do what I call three-part communication, where you say something, I repeat it back to you, and you agree with that, then we can start having a real conversation instead of the assumptions that I have made erroneously, and then you just give up on the conversation. So
Right.
it's very important that we really understand what the other person is saying before we even formulate a response. And too often, as you said, we're in this microwave society where our responses, again, they're just based on what we already know, and we're not even learning about the other person. And in business, in the contracting world, too often we're worried about a lawsuit and how we're going to build a fence, and this is my contract, this is your contract, instead of we came together to complete a project.
Mhm.
And what if we completed the project successfully and didn't even have to worry about all those legalese and all these things that we have? Definitely we have to have these contracts, and we have to have explanations of what's supposed to be done and requirements,
Yep.
but let's get on the same page instead of being enemies.
Right. Right. And you've worked with several organizations over the years. Do you have any particular examples of seeing these communication breakdowns happen and what had to be done to really fix it?
Yeah, often, again, we're building these our defense mechanism. We kick in that fight or flight, and we're either going to fight about something, or we're going to run away from conflict.
Yep.
And we just need to make sure that we're in it to win it, which means we got to make sure that even when we are offended by someone, we still need to understand them. Ryan, one thing that I learned, and I try my best to exercise today, I don't have to agree with you to respect you and to understand you. And that gave me a place where I can, what? I don't even agree with their approach. I don't understand why they're doing it that way, but I can understand that that's the way they want to do it and where they're coming from. So it gives me a little more grace when I'm dealing with others. And you get on these job sites, and again, people they're disputing over, what when the schedule is, how we've been delayed by each other, and fighting over who was supposed to be in this area at this time. When instead, if we sat down and collaborated and said, what, I'm going to be here this date, we're going to complete by this date, can we share this space? Is there opportunity for you to work on a split shift so that I can get my work done and be out of your way? Those kind of collaborations have taken jobs and finished them early instead of them finishing in disputes.
Right. Right. Do you think it's like a perspective of, hey, look, we're all working towards a common goal here. We're not working against each other. Do you feel like that's sort of the focus that should be in the mindset of these people?
Absolutely, Ryan. And what happens when leadership takes that perspective, takes that advantage from the start of a project, of a goal? Maybe your company's working on a new initiative, but when they realize, hey, this is where we are wanting, point people in a direction. This is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to get there. And I want to hear from you when we're off course. I want to hear from you when we're not doing what we set out to do.
Yeah.
And then that leadership helps and opens those doors and lets everybody know, hey, we're working together here. We're not working against each other. And
Right.
then models that example where they work with their team to make things happen. Then we can all get on the same board, same page, and headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I want to segue a little bit here about something you brought up while we were chatting through email before this episode. You talked about mentorship, and I love the idea of mentorship, but I think it's also very challenging because I look at mentorship as also forcing yourself to look in the mirror and admit to your own flaws and being vulnerable as a leader, and not just as a leader within an organization, but a leader of yourself, right? So, talk to us about your approach to mentorship and how you can help people as a mentor really face those challenges, those internal struggles that could be a roadblock to the success.
Ryan, I like how you set this question up. In fact, we all have blind spots. And getting comfortable in your own skin means recognizing, hey, I am not the best person at this activity. In this, this is not one of my greatest traits. And when you're mentoring people, you need to make them aware. Hey, with me, I struggle with details. I'm not a detail oriented person. I'm more of a
Yeah.
results oriented person.
Right.
And so I need people to come alongside me that are detail oriented. And when I'm talking with someone I'm mentoring, I let them know, hey, this is where I stand. This is where I can help you. This is where my strengths are. But if you need help in these other areas, let me find someone else to partner with us.
Yep.
And in fact, when I've been mentored by others, I realize I have spots. I know they're not perfect. Hey, do you know anybody that's perfect, Ryan?
Other than myself, no, I'm kidding. But no, no.
Exactly. So,
Right.
and I know you're perfect, but the rest of us aren't. So
Right.
we have to make sure we recognize that. And sometimes people want to put on this front where they do act like they're perfect. It's not a joke like you just did. They
Right.
really feel like they're always right.
Yep.
And that's just not going to happen. We got to be transparent with each other. You started off about talking about how we can be empathetic when we're listening and be an empathetic listener. It's
Right.
the same thing when we're mentoring other people. We got to go to them where they are.
Yeah.
And remember that we used to be there. Like if I have experience and I'm the one doing the mentoring, then I need to recognize, you know what? One time I didn't have any idea what this was. I don't need to belittle this person because they don't have the knowledge. I need to help them gain the knowledge. And
Yeah.
by the same token, when I'm being mentored by others, and I like to talk about this human chain where I'm being mentored by people and I'm mentoring others. And if we do that and we interconnect with one another, what society would be better if we just use mentorship and apprenticeships in that manner where we're all growing. Let's grow together.
Yeah. That's great, Brian. And one of the things I think we need to talk about too is just the emotions of it. I think you get into situations with organizations where some people have egos and they're too afraid to admit that they don't know something, they're not good at something because their ego's saying, "Hey, I'm at this level, I'm supposed to put on this face that I'm top dog and everybody's got to listen to me." But do you feel like there's an emotional side where people you have to when you mentor people help them dial that down a little bit and help them to become more vulnerable? And how hard is that?
Oh, I'm glad you bring up the emotion side of this because, in fact, as a construction worker for many years, I was brought up to leave my emotions at home
Right.
or leave your emotions in the parking lot.
Yeah.
I've learned now that's impossible.
Right.
In fact, the first time I went to a conference, a construction conference, and there was someone speaking on emotional intelligence, I had, get this, the emotion. Oh, come on, give me a break. What are we going to talk about emotions on construction? I was taught leave those at home.
Right. Yeah.
And it's crazy. I tell people that story then. I talk about that was a raw emotion for me.
Yep.
And I'm saying you can't have emotions. So it's impossible to leave your emotions at home. We are all emotional people. And that ego side, that is an emotion like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I had to realize at times my team was looking to me for the answers that I didn't have.
Yeah.
And I realized, but you know what? Collectively, we have those answers. And so I'd say, hey, you know what? That is a problem. I don't know I'd be transparent and say, I don't know the answer, but let's sit down and talk about it so we can collectively come up with an answer. Yeah. Because having that ego that, my way or the highway, I like to say is a lonely road.
Yep.
And when people do that, they're going to isolate yourself and they're like, you know what? That person can do no wrong. I'm going to leave them alone. And I'm only going to do what's required of me as opposed to doing what I'm inspired to do.
Yeah. That is great. Inspired. I think when people are inspired, they perform better overall.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about tying it all together now because we're trying to talk about creating an environment or a culture of collaboration to achieve a goal. So walk us through, what kind of challenges have you seen or heard out there that is stopping people from doing that? And how do you approach putting a system or a process together where everybody can feel like they can open up communication, they could talk about how they feel. If they have a frustration or a challenge, they're not afraid to open up and tell everybody about it. How do you approach that, especially when you have an organization with hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people? It seems like it's just this mammoth of a challenge for someone like you. So what do you do there, Brian?
It certainly is a mammoth challenge, but how do we overcome mammoth challenges? We break it down into pieces we can manage. Yeah. One of the things I like to do is find out a person's personality. I've been studying behavior and personality types for the last 8 years. DISC is one model, Myers-Briggs. There's several different models. I happen to use the DISC model so that I can find out how a person's wired. You know what? Are they a dominant person? Are they an inspiring, informative person? Are they more structured and more supportive? Or are they more cautious? What is their personality type? And you remember the old book that talked about getting people in the right place on the bus?
Yeah.
When we recognize people's personality types and we recognize, you know what drives me crazy? And I'll just say Ryan, because you and I are on a call together. What drives me crazy about Ryan, because he's so much different than I am. But what if I turn that around and said, you know what? Ryan is strong in areas that I'm not strong in. And
Yeah.
I can lean on Ryan in these areas and I can collaborate with him where his strengths come to the forefront and mine come to the forefront when they're needed. And we
Yeah.
balance and have a harmony of working together where, you know what, when you get more people that are working together and going in the same direction, that culture of collaboration. One of the great examples I like to use, because I came from contracting, general contractor, we use many subcontractors, and those are specialized people. So your block masons, your concrete form folks, those that finish the concrete is even a different group of folks. And then we talk about people that erect structural steel and that paint and do all these different things. All of these people have to come together and bring their strengths and their specialties to a project to do a finalized project that people in the community can enjoy. So that's, when you start to look at it that way, you can actually see it done in a practical way with organizations. The same things works with human beings that have different strengths and different personality types.
And I got to ask you about myself too, because I feel like, I think I'm more on the high D side of the disc where I'm very task oriented. I have very little patience for detail, but I also find that I beat myself up over it because I want to be someone who pays attention to detail, but I have such a hard time doing it. You know what I mean? So is it worth it for, let's say, someone like me to go, yeah, let me try to get better on that? Or should I just focus on what I'm good at and not try to blend into these other personality types and try to do better so I can be more well-rounded? What's your opinion on that, Brian?
So this is that answer that sometimes confusing people. It depends.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you're working on. If you are the only sole person, and I've learned this in my solopreneurship, when it comes down to paying attention to details, and I'm the lone soldier, I better pay attention to details.
Right.
When there's a project I'm working on collectively and I know that's not my strength, then I have to say, okay, well, knowing that's not my strength, I'm going to find somebody to complement me and help me in this area and give them the stuff that's more detail oriented. And I'll use an example. Many years ago, I was putting together a booth for us to exhibit our company at a big convention.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the flyers printed and there was a spelling error that I didn't see it.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues saw it. In fact, he was in quality control, go figure. And so from then on, I was like, you know what, when I get a proof, how hard is it for me to send it over to this person who has that as a skill? Yeah. They can look at it, they can find the problems and send it back to me. And that's how I use their strength. Yep. Knowing that I would just, hey, I just want the thing done if it looks cool, and I don't look at the spelling of the words. I have learned to do a better job after I realized that. Yeah. So I think recognizing our blind spots and doing what we can to complement them, but knowing it's just not going to ever be our strength. So we need to make sure we have other people that come behind us. In my case today, I might use a subcontractor, a solopreneur that in my industry that can back check me on things. So yeah. It's kind of, when you the biggest thing is start to recognize, find out, hey, you're a dominant personality type. So what does that mean? You need to slow down a little bit. I have to do the same thing. I'm a dominant and inspiring personality type. So I bounce between D and I, depending on which environment I'm in. So when I'm in my coaching and training business, my I comes up. When I'm in project management, my dominant side comes up. Yeah. But my S and my C, they're both below average. In fact, my C's in the basement. So I'll take risks that other people won't take. Mm-hmm. So when I know that about myself, if I can find that cautious person and say, hey, you mind looking over my shoulder while I do this? In fact, my wife is, if we say opposites attract, right? Yeah. So my wife has that C personality type. And when I'm booking a flight, I'll say, hey, make sure I'm selecting PM versus AM because I've made that mistake on my own many times. Right. Where I'm like, hey, here's my flight, 7, and I'm done. And it's like, oh man, I got to reschedule this flight because I selected AM when I meant PM. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's important to look at that and look at your process of things too. Like I just know, for example, I have a VA now, and she does an excellent job helping me out in areas where maybe they're just things that I'm not as good at, more of the detailed stuff. But I found that now that we have a process where she's doing that and I'm doing this, and we have a whole, process that's working and producing results, it really works out. But I think maybe you're a little bit like this too, Brian, where you get in this mindset where you think I can do everything, I can do it all. Like I don't need to allocate work. But all you do in that situation sometimes is just drain yourself and you get burnt out. I mean, have you ever experienced that sort of thing too?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I'm working on something I'm not gifted in, it absolutely drains me.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to do everything yourself, I've got the book called The Myth of Multitasking. And after reading that book, I realized that multitasking is multi-messing.
Right.
I can make a mess of things that I'm trying to do all on my own.
Yeah.
And you mentioned your VA. When you start to bring some structure to the situation, someone that's not detail oriented that can have a checklist and go through that because they know they're not detail oriented, that will help them.
Yeah.
So it's when we think about how others can help us and bring us along, and we collaborate with them, we're going to improve our outputs.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think, and I want to ask you about this too, Brian. I think this is a major thing to think about, especially these days with the world we live in, with just the media, of course, COVID, everything has kind of changed, right? And I think a lot about mindset. And I look at this personally too. I think mindset is something that we consistently have to work on, because the world is different than it was 50 years ago before we had social media and we had LinkedIn and we have all this noise, I should say, going on, right? How do you recommend people really work on a positive mindset to achieve great things amongst all this noise and stuff that's going on right now?
Another great question, Ryan. What I try to do, and it is, as you alluded to, it's very difficult in this noisy environment we live in today.
Yeah.
I try to fill my mind with things that I want to fill my mind with. And I try to make that positive things of learning, things of collaboration.
Yeah.
I want to look at it from a perspective of how will this help me?
Yep.
And I don't want to waste a ton of time. I don't mind being entertained some, but I don't want to waste a ton of time on entertainment. The other thing, we talked about that power of pause when we're listening to others. There's also a power of pause for us individually, where we need to take time and be disconnected from all this electronic, all this busyness, and really self-reflect on where we are and what we can do and how we can improve our mindset. What can we do to improve and go forward? The other thing, I'm not competing with all these other people in this technology savvy world. I'm not competing with all these, great speakers and superstars. I'm competing with Brian.
Mm-hmm.
And when I recognize that and I get that mindset and I say, okay, if I can just do something better today than I did yesterday, I'm making progress. I'm making forward momentum.
Yeah.
And when I'm making forward momentum, people around me are making forward momentum.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that advice. Well, I kind of want to wrap this up, Brian, but I want to ask you something I like to ask a lot of people. If you could go back in time and let's say you're that kid who, you know, was doing some work to get through high school, you practically, you almost dropped out of high school. Like if you go back and see that kid now, what kind of advice would you tell yourself?
Oh man, another great question. I would tell myself so many things, man.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so just pay attention more. In fact, when I started in construction,
Yeah.
I asked and I remembered back to asking my pre-algebra teacher, why do I need to know this to buy a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk? Have you ever heard that question before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I wish they would have taught our teachers to ask us, well, do you plan to be a purchasing agent for a grocery store?
Yeah.
Because if that's all you plan to do, then maybe you don't. But when I rolled out that first set of drawings and there were perimeters and areas and square footages, and I realized, ooh, I learned this stuff. Now I got to remember how to apply it.
Yep.
And that's why I went back into the high schools and started mentoring students, because I wanted them to understand that you can apply this in the real world. Whereas my teachers, it was really just to pass a test.
Yeah.
They didn't explain to me where it applied. And so that would be one of the things I would encourage the younger Brian is, hey, you're not just learning English to pass a test. You're learning English so you can write bid letters one day. And now today, I mean, I'm writing speeches and I'm writing books.
Yeah.
Boy, how I wish I'd have paid attention.
Right. Right. Me too. I wish I didn't have like ADD in high school, so I could have
Yeah,
paid more
right.
attention. Yeah. Yeah. But no, this is a great conversation, Brian. I think if people are listening, they want to get to know you and how you apply these skills to leadership. I think we can all work, no matter what level you're at in your business or in your career, you can always get better. But it also comes down to looking at yourself and being vulnerable and open to your own faults, but not beating yourself up for it. Just understanding, you know, how do I work with this, with what I have and what I know and what I'm good at. So, uh, this has been a good conversation, Brian. Where can people find out more or get in touch with you if they're interested in talking with you?
Oh, that's great. I'll give you my email address. That's Brian, Brian, B as in Bravo, at Build CS, which stands for Consulting Services.net. So that's Brian B at buildcs.net. Here's my phone number. Give me a call. Some people are brave enough to do that. It's 863-800-9658. And then finally, I host a live monthly call. If you want to join that call, when you email me or call me, I'll sign you up. We'll do 2 months of that for free, where you can join about 70 authors from around the world. It's called Voices for Leadership. You want to see more about that? That's vflcommunity.com. So that's our membership website where we join with 70 authors from around the globe. That's my collaborative effort in leadership. And we've got 2 volumes of that book. We're actually launching our 3rd volume, which is our youth volume. So if you know a young person age 17 to 22 and you want to nominate them, we're accepting applications for our youth version now.
That's great. Well, this has been great. And if you're listening to Brian and you want to get involved, go to the website, call him, text him, email him, get in touch with him. He can definitely help you out. Or maybe you know someone you're working with or a client that needs help. Have them reach out to Brian. Thank you, Brian. It's been a great conversation, and I wish you the best rest of your summer.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. And looking forward to those fall temperatures.
Yeah, take care. Did you enjoy this episode? I hope so. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Ryan Says Thanks. Your support is appreciated. And hey, even if you don't buy me a coffee, I'm happy to have you listening. So keep it up, and thanks again.